Coming up on the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break, Edgar and I will get you all of your latest news and information from the state capitol and CDE with an in-depth analysis of how it impacts your school community. Plus, we're going to be talking about the two newsworthy items from last week involving California public education and vaccines. We've got two district leaders on the show today to talk about the impact. Plus, we're going to talk about our Lead with Pride event.
The ACSA Legislative Lunch Break starts now.
And it's just after 1 o'clock. We welcome you on a Wednesday to the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break, along with Edgar Zazwata, ACSA Senior Director of Policy and Governmental Relations, and our upcoming Executive Director here at ACSA. I'm Naj Alikhan, ACSA Senior Director of Marketing and Communications. Welcome. We are so happy to have you today. We've got a really, really big show for you. We're going to talk so much about the impact of ACSA today. Edgar, how are you?
I'm good. I have to start. I'm happy to be back in my office. That's still my office for a few weeks here. You guys scared me. You got me good last week. I take pride on not losing my cool. I lost my cool last week. I'm just happy I didn't get censored here on the internet and throw in, some words that may have not been appropriate for our viewing audience. So I know you guys had some fun with me. I'm happy to be back. Nobody could creep up on behind me, at least this week. So
look, we've said this before. We have some loose broadcast standards here at ACSA. So if any expletives had come out of your mouth, it would have been okay. But the number of people that had to watch your reaction on Rewind last week from when we set you up for that big celebration, it was great. So welcome again. So happy to have you. Susan Denton and Neri Pais, our first couple of viewers on the chat today. Mark Campbell, I see ACSA President Charlie Hoffman is here. Ellen Wheeler, Donna Campbell, Michelle Borges on here as well. So happy to have all of you with us. We are going to bring on a couple of our board members in just a moment to talk a little bit about the impact of these two newsworthy items that took place at the tail end of last week involving vaccinations in California public schools. Edgar, let's just address this one right off the top. Dr. Richard Pan and Senate Bill 871. Now, this time last week, Dr. Pan was here on our show discussing his proposed vaccination legislation. It wasn't 24 hours after the show before he pulled it from the current session. Now, you and I, we talked about this with a number of our members. He really stuck to his talking points last week, which, is fine. Some of our viewers gave him some substantive feedback on this proposed legislation. They asked questions. They wanted clarification. Give me your look on this, because, 24 hours later after this show is on, you would like to think that this show had an impact on the legislation. However, perhaps there's more to this.
Yeah, I think it's a testament, Naj, that advocacy, especially these days, kind of takes many different forms. And this show has been a mechanism for advocacy. When we've had policymakers on here, when we've had some of the thought leaders, our folks, and I love this. I love the fact that our folks aren't being shy. Our folks are never shy. They're respectful, but they're going to let the folks know what the real impact was. I don't think it's a coincidence. There was a lot of factors at play. And, I'm always shy about making predictions, but I think we had actually said it on a couple of shows that we wouldn't be surprised if there was a development that he went in a different direction because of what was happening. The politics in the Capitol were becoming difficult. We noted that individuals on our Leg Action days, Senator Connie Leyva, the chair of the Education Committee, told them that she wasn't going to support the bill. That was a big factor. On top of that, you had our members week after week expressing the concerns, not because they're not about vaccines. And I think that's the thing that was clear about us. This is not, you can't put folks like our organization, like some of the other groups that really were against moving in that direction for other reasons, for other political reasons, that our folks were really concerned about some of the unintended consequences. I think that got voiced last week. I think the senator was hearing that, coupled with all of the other dynamics he was balancing. And I wasn't surprised. The timing, maybe it was a little surprised that it was so quickly after he came on to talk to us. But I think it all came to a head.
So let's talk about Governor Newsom then, because this came down just a matter of hours after Dr. Pan pulled his legislation. The governor delaying his plan to create a COVID-19 vaccination mandate for students via regulation pending full FDA approval, due in large part to your feedback, the feedback from ACSA members and the storytelling. The administration acknowledged that mid-year implementation would be problematic. The earliest California would implement a vaccine requirement after full FDA approval would be July 1 of 2023. Okay, so we know that ACSA member feedback and storytelling helped perhaps some influence here. Tell us about how this one worked itself.
I'll be very clear, and the governor's office actually told me to communicate this back to our members. Shortly before that announcement, same day as the Dr. Pan announcement, they were already had this in the works. I think what accelerated this was knowing that they were getting questions. Well, what about the governor's effort? And so the top governor's officials called and said, hey, we want you to have a heads up that this is going to happen. Mm-hmm. And importantly, they said the reason is we've heard this feedback that one, even if we were going to do this by regulation, that the field needed enough time for implementation. And they were realizing that the FDA hasn't given full authorization. So the clock is ticking and it's not going to work. And then two, which I think got lost a little bit in the story, that initially the governor's office was talking about implementation either July 1st or January 1st. They changed course. Even if the FDA were to authorize in a few weeks, in a few months, they're telling us, no, we're not going to put this on schools in the middle of the year, again, because of implementation issues. And the governor's office gave credit to our folks, to ACSA, to our folks for communicating that. And they said they were sensitive to the implementation concerns. So I think, again, not to beat a dead horse yet, but this has been a very consistent message from our folks on these type of platforms, on our Ledge Action days, and just in individual communications that our members have been having with their policymakers. And in this case, they listened.
I'm going to bring up one topic, and Edgar, I do know that we will address this further on, probably its own show, but it's late start. Got this story that came from KSWB, the NBC affiliate in Monterey. Monterey Peninsula Unified School District released its first draft of a new school scheduled to comply with a statewide law requiring schools to start later to help children get more sleep. Under the proposal, high schools in the district will go from 8:30 to 3:25. Middle schools 8:35 and end at 3:10. School campuses will continue to be open at 7:45. I want to just quote here Superintendent P.K. Diffenbaugh. He says, quote, I think that from parents, it's overwhelmingly positive because they realize they want their kids to get more time for sleep. I think the major concern is ending high school later with the amount of activities starting after school, but that's going to push everything later into the evening, which can be challenging. Let me just take you, Edgar, into the Alicon house this morning because I love to do that. My wife is a kindergarten teacher. I've got a senior in high school, a freshman in high school. Parents are still going to have to get their kids to school at a certain point in the day. And just because school starts at a later time doesn't mean that that's going to shift the parent's schedule in any way. If the child has to show up at 7 o'clock for school starting at 8, the child is going to be there. It's going to be the same thing here. I'm concerned because in addition to the unintended consequences here of maybe transportation, now we're trying to figure out who's going to be supervising these kids when they show up an hour, 90 minutes before school because of the late start time. Unintended consequences, Edgar. We've talked about this before, but I get a feeling like we're going to have to address this topic as we move forward.
I mean, you just summarized what we've been hearing from our members. Frankly, from our members, from our teachers for some time. CTA was in the same position. We don't have to tell the whole story that we had a lot of concerns with the original bill. Been talking to our leaders for years about this. I know we're going to have Sean on on our show here in a few minutes about another issue. But in talking to folks like him, these are the concerns that they were raising all along, and I think you are now seeing it in practice. This is why it's so important. This is why we're around, that you need to consult. Even when they don't agree, they need to consult with the folks who actually have to implement this on the ground. There's going to be challenges. I wouldn't be surprised if this becomes a bigger issue, even after it goes into law, for the reasons that you stated.
Yeah, and I'm just looking at Nair Pais, who puts in a comment here in the section. Elementary administrators deal with this regularly, with our students arriving at 6:45 a.m. for 8:17 start time. We could devote an entire episode to this subject. We'll certainly do that moving forward. Let's bring in our guests today so we can talk a little bit about the news from the state capitol last week. Julie Vitale is the superintendent from Oceanside Unified School District in Southern California. Sean Tenenbaum, superintendent, San Benito High School District. Julie and Sean, it's an honor to have you both on the show. I'm going to have both of you respond, and Julie, I'll have you start first. What was your initial reaction to what was decided in the state capitol last week involving these COVID-19 vaccination news items? And what's the feedback been like from the stakeholders in your community?
Well, thank you, first of all, for inviting me to participate. It's an honor to represent Oceanside Unified School District, so thank you so much. My first reaction and that of my team was, wow, they're actually going to give us time to implement something. As you know, these last 2 years with COVID, everything has been, without judgment, I say this, but very last minute, and we've had to just pivot on a dime constantly. So this was actually really good news for us, to give us the opportunity to be able to message to our students and our families what they need to do to be able to enter school next year, not this year, and help them have the opportunity to obtain the vaccine. And, hopefully the healthcare industry will ramp up their ability to give that immunization, and a lot of that responsibility won't continue to fall on school systems to provide the locations and the opportunities. Really hoping that we can ramp that up to assist more people with obtaining the vaccine. But really, it was welcome news to have more time. What a gift.
Sean, your reaction.
Yeah, thank you, Julie. And Edgar and Naj, thanks so much for having me. Honored to be here, and you do great work. So extremely pleased. I think, to echo a couple of Julie's sentiments, I think there's a sense of relief to really have a decision and have it early on. It helps us with our planning. One for summer school for high school districts and middle schools, as well as summer sessions for elementary, but also for next year, really to adequately staff, to plan effectively for personnel developments and or what we may see with attendance. So a sense of relief in the district. I think there's a sense of relief in the community regarding having the knowledge of what is to come. And giving us enough time, as Julie mentioned, to effectively plan and implement. So I think overall, Naj and Edgar, just a real sense of relief on our end.
Sean, I'll start with you on this question. Julie actually helped answer this. She made the point about one of the toughest parts of the last 24 or 25 months, whatever, I've lost track, the timer, the COVID timer. I'm not sure where it's at now. It ran out of batteries, I think. One of the things that you folks have been confronted with is like literally drinking out of a fire hose. And it felt, especially in those early days, of the changing the guidelines, changing the rules, sometimes on a daily basis and on a weekly basis. Julie talked about this whole notion, and you mentioned it, Sean, about just having some time. What have we learned from here? And why, for those that watch this, that maybe are not in your shoes, why has that become such a challenge? Why is it important for the state policymakers to build that in and to be mindful, not just on COVID-related mandates, but just when they're putting new requirements on our schools? Why is it so important to have that lead up and that time for implementation?
I think it's a great question, Edgar. And I think having a runway for any successful implementation is extremely important. So imagine whether it's the late start bill, whether it's vaccine mandate, whether it's pre-K, it doesn't matter. Administrators and educational leaders need time to effectively plan so they can support their school communities with the best of their abilities. And I think, as we mentioned time and time again on the show and throughout the past 24 months, time gives us the ability to effectively plan, communicate, implement, and then ultimately reflect and make adaptations as we move. And I think if we follow that simple rule, it'll be a lot more effective for us moving forward. But thank you for asking, Edgar.
Julie, I'll just note that you touched on this in the opening question, but just what message would you give policymakers? Undoubtedly, there's going to be new stuff, right? There's going to be new stuff that they're throwing at you. What would you want them to hear as they're thinking about that moving forward?
Yeah, slow down. It's okay. Like, slow down a little bit. Every year, I think they contemplate hundreds of bills that have impact in our school systems. And, oftentimes there isn't funding to go along with these new initiatives. And, so if we take, the TK movement, which is great, I'm all about TK. We've already offered it at all of our schools. So that was something we were going to do anyway. But we have the facilities to do that. We have the funding designated to do that. And not all school systems necessarily have that. So that funding piece and the process piece, like, we can't just snap our fingers and make something happen. I know it seems like that's what we're able to do because it's forced upon us with mandates. But we're school systems. We have processes for things so that people understand why a change is being made. And we like to gather input and figure out the best way to do things. And oftentimes, because we're not given the amount of time to have a process, we just make snap decisions and put things in literally overnight. And by doing that, we don't do it the best way, right? We don't involve all of our partners. We have teachers associations. We have classified associations. Some districts have administrative associations. We're always asked to get input from our community, our parents and guardians. Well, if we're not given the time to do that, then how can we do that? And then, oftentimes we're blamed that we didn't get people involved. Well, when we have to do things literally within weeks or months, or during the pandemic, literally overnight, it doesn't give us the time to have a true, authentic process. And that's what we need to do in order to make things successful. So give us time, allow us to communicate. I know everyone's going to be shocked, but when we send emails, they don't always get read. It's not one when it's communicated, right? It takes over and over and over and over. So give us that time and give us that funding associated with things to have a process and be successful with implementation.
Yeah, admittedly, my wife reads most of the emails from the school district that come in. Sorry, my apologies to the school district and their teachers for doing that. Let me ask both of you one last question, because both of you mentioned time. Sean, you specifically said, time gives us the ability to plan. I'm going to ask both of you, and Julie, I'll have you start. Let's discuss the pathways that your district has used to communicate with parents, with students, with stakeholders, especially with things changing all the time, and with dads like this one here who have trouble answering or opening the email correspondence.
Well, first, Naj, I'll say that, hey, what a great system. You have someone in the household that's responsible for school communications. So
yes, and it's not me, apparently.
That's no excuse, Naj. That's no excuse. You need to read the emails too.
Come on, Naj.
Step it up, Naj.
So we have a pretty robust system of communication where parents and guardians can determine how they want the information. So if they want it via an email or via a text message, we definitely use that, where we directly send to the email account of your choice for the households. Of course, we use various social media channels. We use our website. We use flyers because Naj doesn't read his emails. Naj picks up his kid. We give you a flyer about some information. Of course, we use board meetings, other parent and guardian meetings, really everything that we have available to us. And especially during the pandemic, it was critical to use as many channels as possible. And of course, word of mouth. And, with word of mouth, we played a telephone game a little bit, maybe information changing, but that's literally how people were getting information as things were changing so quickly in the pandemic. So just use multiple channels to get the message out as clearly as possible. And then the nature of the message changes, right? Like some information people needed immediately, and some information we need people just to have at some point. So knowing when to use the channels for whatever it is you're trying to communicate.
And Sean, what about you?
Well, I think Julie touched on some great points, and we obviously had a very myriad communication platform, but two things that were really helpful, I think, in terms of the feedback we received from our school community. One was creating videos, short clips to really, accentuate a key point or an item that we wanted to make sure was shared with mom and dad, our students, our staff. That way, everybody in the school community could replay that multiple times. And the other was just a webinar format, just like we're doing today, having the opportunity to have a live person on the other end of the video, questions being asked and answered. And I think that really helped to elevate the communication. It gave a little personal touch, that it wasn't just an email, it wasn't just a Twitter blast. There was a person behind it, and they actually got to see that person. And I think that had the human element to it. So.
Hey, Sean, I know you've got a meeting coming up, so we'll let you off the hook. Please give my best to everybody in the Hay Baylor family. Sean Tenenbaum, Superintendent, San Benito High School District. Sean, thanks for being with us today.
An honor. Thank you, everybody. Take care.
Hey, Julie, I want to make sure that we hit a specific program that we've got coming up over here at ACSA. This is the 2022 ACSA Lead with Pride event. It's the very first time that we are conducting this type of event. Tell us about how this came about and really why it's come about.
Yeah, thank you, Naj. The Lead with Pride Summit is coming up, and it's going to be here in Oceanside at the beautiful Seabird Hotel, May 4th, 5th, and 6th. And really, it came up through a lot of advocacy of a lot of ACSA members who have really noticed that at various workshops, at various conferences that ACSA sponsored, there wasn't a whole lot of focus on the LGBTQIA plus community. And while there was a workshop here and there there have been more and more lately, there just needed to be more of a focus. And so there have been a lot, myself included, along with other ACSA members and other ACSA board members, that really thought that this topic is so at the forefront right now. It really has been for many years, but with recent legislation that's been passed throughout the country, at a disturbing, alarming rate of what different states want to do with legislation in regard to our LGBT community. It was really time to empower our administrators to take advantage of the laws that we have here in California that really do empower us to embrace our LGBT community and support our administrators to actually address the Fair Education Act, which is fair, accurate, inclusive, and respectful, to ensure that we teach about prominent LGBT people. Why can't I say this acronym? Like it's foreign to me, it's not. LGBT people positively in our curriculum, and so many other laws that protect us. We are different in California. We are taking a stand. We are an inclusive state. But even with all of the laws and protections that we have, there are still school systems that aren't addressing the needs of LGBT students and staff. Mm-hmm. So this is a perfect time and opportunity to empower administrators to understand and know what they can do to create positive and affirming spaces for our lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender students and staff. So I'm really proud that ACSA is putting this conference forward.
Julie, you touched on it right now, and the irony is not lost on me, and I think it's actually one of the whys, right? Why ACSA is moving forward with this at a time, as you stated, in the country where we're seeing efforts to really go backwards for all the progress we've seen, for it to there really being an assault on this community. You hit it on the head. This is one we're really excited about, this conference, and I think it's going to be great. But I think you referenced there's probably a need for bigger systemic changes, whether the support that we give our educators, our members, our students. So what would you like this to be the catalyst for beyond this conference? We're all going to hopefully go away from this with great feelings, motivated. But even us as an organization, what do you think the long-term plan should be as it relates to supports?
Wow, that's a tough question, Edgar. But here's what I'll say. I think that in every conversation we have about diversity or inclusion or equity or advocacy, we need to keep this community in mind. We are always, well, not always, we are often left out of the conversation when we talk about caring about diversity. And we're not part of the conversation, and we need to be. Because this shows, you know, if ACSA is talking about this as a prominent place where they want to be recognized and advocate, then we need to talk about the needs of our LGBT community. And we need to be on the forefront of that, right? So we need to ensure that our administrators feel protected to be out in their workplace, which a lot of us are very afraid to be. Because we know that we can be terminated. I'm a superintendent. I can be terminated at the pleasure of the board. So how do we help our people understand the laws that actually protect them from that termination? And how do we help our allies feel empowered to know that they can bring this work into their school systems? So by ACSA using the language, by ACSA putting articles in EdCal, information on the websites, empowering people with information, that is a major step. By hosting this conference focused on this community, ACSA is saying, we see you, we care about you, we love you, we're going to embrace you, we're going to include you, and we're going to empower all of our people to ensure that our schools are safe and affirming places. Because if you look to other states, there's 16 other states right now in our country that there's bills moving through their process that are anti-LGBT. I grew up in that world. And, you know, in 2015, I was afforded the right to be married in this country. And now we're going backwards. We're taking those things away. If I'm confused as a grown woman on this earth, then imagine what kind of impact this is having for kids. And all I keep thinking about when people ask me about legislation and different decisions that government is making, all I can think about is, you know, kids are watching. They're watching what we do. They're listening to what we say. And more than ever, they have access to information, right? So don't we want to be on the forefront of really empowering our staff and empowering our students to know they are cared for, they are seen, and we want to create the best possible situation so that they can thrive in their childhood and not hide in their childhood.
Julie, let me ask you one last question, because we always kind of like to know what the end result is. And even though we don't have an end to any of this, I wanted to know, what do you hope participants at this conference leave with, so that the very next day or the next few hours or something like that, they're locked in?
Yes. The number one thing that I would want people to take away, that no matter what role they're in, and we have some counselors signed up, I think some teachers snuck in there, we have administrators from all different levels of the organization, so that I hope they take away ideas, skills, things that they can do literally Monday morning after they attend the conference, that no matter where they are in the organization, they can do something different in their role to create a safe and affirming space for LGBT students and staff, whether it's something small or something large, that they feel empowered, that they know the laws in the state of California support this effort.
Julie Vitale is the superintendent, Oceanside Unified School District. Julie, it's been an honor to have you here on the show. I promise if I get any emails from Oceanside Unified School District, I will open them and not force my wife to open them.
Much appreciated.
Thank you so much. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you, Naj. Thank you, Edgar.
Want to remind you, the Lead with Pride event May 4th through 6th in Pasadena. There is one other thing that I want to address, Edgar.
Oceanside. You're in Oceanside. Like,
see, look at that. See, I wrote down Pasadena twice. See, what would happen if I didn't have you double checking my facts?
I listen to you once in a while, Naj.
I know. Thank you. I appreciate that somebody is. I'm going to ask you a vaccination question in just a moment. First, let me remind you, if you like what you see, and you're not a subscriber to us right now, go for it. You should be a subscriber. Subscribe to us on our YouTube channel, or follow us on Facebook, like us on Facebook, become part of the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break family, get alerts when we're about to come on live with breaking news, or any of our regular broadcasts if you subscribe. Edgar, you and I received this inquiry last week from Lance Bradley over at Yucaipa Calamasa Unified. The question is, what comes from the vaccine requirement for staff? Do you feel like that's the next piece that needs clarification? And when is that coming? All right, so let's talk about that. Is that the next domino to fall? Is that the next discussion that needs to take place?
Yeah, we were in some meetings with some high-ranking governor's office officials this week. This question has come up, I think, every single week, whether it be the lunch break, some of our meetings that we have with our members about, is the vaccinate or test requirement for employees going to change? So a couple of things that the governor's office has said: no plans to change it for this school year. They're currently actively discussing what the broader rules are going to be for the next year. And they've said that we should have an answer on that in the coming weeks, quote unquote weeks. I say weeks because we've been down this drill before. We say soon, that, it soon comes, it goes, and we're still not there. But no changes right now. So I think everybody could anticipate that this will continue to be the requirement for the rest of the year. I do think that they're thinking about whether to loosen that up moving forward.
I love how we now qualify soon, or within the next few days, or within the next few weeks, as really not an actual number, but more like a state of mind. Let me ask you this Craig Gensler question that just came in. When can we stop weekly testing the unvaccinated staff? Any update on that?
It's same issue we're talking about just now.
Okay.
I'll use a different word than the governor's office. Not soon. More details. Now, I think the question is, there's no certainty that the rule is going to change here. They're discussing it. If you ask for my analysis, I think there's a chance there, given the trend of what we're seeing with them rolling back some of the mitigation efforts. I would not be surprised if this is next on the list, to your point, that they say coming for the next year, that this wouldn't be a requirement for that.
All right, folks, programming note, we are not on next week, but we are back on first week of May as we make our way towards the May revision. Should be an interesting couple of weeks as we start the month of May. Edgar, great show today. Have a good rest of the day, man.
Yeah, I was fired up. We'll miss everybody last week, but I think I love how we did some reflection here on the vaccine discussion and talking about Julie's words in terms of the importance of this work. The importance that this is really going to start at this conference. But I loved her impassioned plea about some of the bigger issues that we need to take on as a system. So really proud that ACSA is taking that on. So look forward to that event.
Absolutely. Folks, thank you so much for joining us here on the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. We are here live Wednesdays, 1 p.m. on ACSA Facebook and ACSA YouTube. Have a great rest of the week and great rest of the day. We'll see you next time.